Hello there, it's the Silly Moustache. Now I usually talk about guitars or songs, but I have other interests too, of course, so today I'm going to talk about guitar strings. I have a pretty simplistic approach to string gauges, and so I use medium gauge strings on my Collins Dreadnoughts, on my Santa Cruz RS, which is a 12 fret short scale jumbo, on my National Estrelita. I sometimes put an extra 7 on the first string for that if I'm playing slide, and my arch tops. I use light gauge strings on my Collins 000, this one, and my 00, and my Waterloo WL12. Smaller guitars, lighter strings. The 00 and the Waterloo, of course, has a shorter scale, so less tension on lower tension strings. On my 12 strings, I use medium top and heavy bottom. Don't. On my dobro, I use a similar gauge to mediums, but with a heavier first, second, and third. I put two 18s on the first and second, and my G string, which, alright, don't do that again, which gets quite a lot of work on a dobro, is a 28. On my mandolin I use medium gauge, which is 11 to 40. So let's talk about the makes and stuff like that. So for my Dreadnoughts, I have tried in recent times John Pierce, which is the favourite of many on the Collins forum. Now, I have a theory about this. Collins guitars are well balanced, whereas the Martin tends to be more bass balanced. So Collins may appear to some ears to be rather bright. The John Pierce strings I found are rather warm, which I think is probably a good reason to use them on Collins if you find them a bit too bright. Just recently I've been using Martin SPs because I heard that they were stopped making them, so I thought I'd buy a batch and try them. They're okay. Now I have my equivalent theory. Martin guitars tend to be a little bit bass biased. I find these a little bit thin and trebly, so that would balance out the Martin sound well. I find them a little bit thin, but acceptable on my Collins guitars. But my go-to for many years have been the D'Addario EJ17s, and one advantage is you can buy them in packs of 10 or 25. I buy packs of 10. So the variations, I do variation on Dreadnoughts. I have for a long time had a slightly higher action than Collins recommend, and I've swapped out the 13 and the 17, the first and the second, on my EJ17s for light gauge 12 and 16. But I've recently changed my mind about that. I've had the action taken down slightly back to what Collins recommend, which is 232 and 332. Strange way of expressing fractions, but there we go. And I've gone back to just using the medium gauge 1 to 6. On the where was I? On the John Pierce, I've tried, done the same thing, but I just find them a little bit too warm, and also they don't come hermetically sealed, which is a bit of a problem. On the National, I have the same strings, usually D'Addario EJ17s, but if I'm using slide, I will put an extra 17 on the first string. On all my guitars, I usually have them set up at 110 on bass and 80 to 90 thou on the trebles. My 12 strings, where's that? Oh, light gauge, D'Addario EJ16s, or the SB equivalents, which I haven't yet tried yet. I have two 12 strings. I have a Martin D1220, on which I put D'Addario EJ37s. This medium top, heavy bottom, that's their description, which go 12, 12, 54, 30. 12, 12, 54, 30, but I tuned down one tone, D to D, and I have a Harmony H120, which is a bit more rough and a bit more jangly, and so it's the only guitar on which I consider bronze strings. So I buy these Martin M120s, exactly the same gauges as the EJ37s, again tuned down to D. That's the 12 strings. On my arch tops, I have used D'Addario EJ22 nickel wound for quite a long time, but I've recently been trying these nickel bronze, and these ones are NB 1256s, so they're slightly lighter on the trebles, and they're quite nice, but they're £10 as opposed to £7 for the EJ22, so I might well go back to EJ22s, which are fine. My arch tops are all fully acoustic, but I just kind of like the nickel. Similarly, I've been using nickel on my mandolin for some time now. I ordered some phosphor bronze mandolin strings, and they turned up as nickel. Didn't realise until it came time to change. These are my favourites, Jim Dunlop, but they're getting increasingly more difficult. I feel that they have a little more tension than equivalent D'Addarios, and I quite like that. Similarly, on my Dobro, I've also been a fan of Jim Dunlop strings for a long time. A little bit brighter, a little bit higher tension, I feel. Plus, in these sets, they used to give you an extra 18 for the first string, which I really liked. I can't get them in the UK anymore. So that's my wind-up of strings. I do feel that a medium gauge string is appropriate to the Dreadnought. Dreadnought is a big, loud instrument for projecting and pushing that power through the bass, the middle and the trebles out in a combo setting, and that's how I play, and that's why I prefer the mediums. Yes, of course you can use light gauge if you want, but I feel that you need to put a certain amount of octane in your strings to drive the engine of the top of the guitar. That's a poetic way of putting it, isn't it? With smaller guitars, I would use my 000 flat picked. But when I'm performing, I tend to overplay if I'm playing a 000. So the light gauge strings, less tension. This is a standard scale like the Dreadnought, very similar neck, but when it gets to the shorter scales, I find that I tend to overplay them a little bit in public, so they mainly stay at home. The Waterloo goes to a jam with me every so often. This is my choice. I've developed this idea, this theory, my mindset over many, many years. I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's wrong. It's right for me, it may not be right for you. Collins suggest not only medium gauge strings for the Dreadnoughts, but D'Addario strings, and who am I to argue with them? And it's the same with the EJ16s on the trebles and the smaller guitars. The National is a short scale instrument, and it's a small body, but it's a very loud and very powerful instrument, so it goes the mediums at what plus, of course, if I'm using slide on it. So anyway, that's the Silly Moustache's summary. I hope that's useful to you. There are many other makes of string out there. I don't believe there are as many makes as there are brands, but that's a whole nother question. But it's worth experimenting, and it's worth looking at the maker's recommendations as well. So if you have been, thanks for watching. Bye.